Hello friends. Under the shade of olive trees, beneath the cold gaze of marble statues, we uncover the deepest sexual secrets of ancient Greece. This dark journey, which begins where philosophy and law end, will reveal the most secret, most dangerous stories I have ever heard in my life. Are we ready to see the decay behind the mask of perfection? Your likes and comments on my videos are truly invaluable. You feel the cold marble beneath your feet before you see anything at all. The darkness is absolute, suffocating, broken only by the flickering amber of distant torches that cast shadows dancing like demons on stone walls. Your breath comes shallow, echoing in this vast chamber that smells of incense, sweat, and something else, something primal you can't quite name. Then you hear it, the rhythmic chanting, low and guttural, growing louder with each passing heartbeat. You're not supposed to be here. No one is. This is where the sacred and the forbidden blur into something ancient Greece never wanted you to know. The year is 420 BCE, though the practices we're about to uncover stretch back centuries before, woven so deeply into the fabric of Hellenic civilization that to remove them would be to unravel everything. We thought we understood about the birthplace of Western democracy. I'm still amazed that people from Snaplo to Seoul, from Logos to Los Angeles, click on these stories. It tells me something profound about our shared need to understand the shadows of our past. The symposium was already underway when the young man arrived, his hair still damp from the gymnasium's bathing pools, olive oil glistening on his skin in the lamplight. He was 16, perhaps 17, the precise age, when Athenian society believed a youth transformed from boy to man, when his body became a battleground for desires that the city-state not only tolerated, but systematically The older men reclining on cushions turned their gazes toward him with an intensity that would, in our modern context, trigger immediate alarm. But in classical Athens, this was peder-education. This was civilization itself. We know this not from salacious rumor or Christian revisionism, but from their own words, preserved in vases, painted with explicit imagery. In the philosophical dialogues of Plato, in the victriotes of Pindar that celebrated these relationships as the highest form of love, the Greeks had a word for it, pederastia, the love of boys. But translation fails us here, flattening something far more complex and disturbing into a simple term. What they practiced was a institutionalized system of mentorship that paired adolescent boys with adult men in relationships that combined pedagogy politics in ways that would see every participant imprisoned in the modern world. The rules were intricate, almost Byzantine in their specificity. The erased, the older lover, typically in his 20s or 30s, pursued the Araminos, the beloved boy with gifts, a girl perhaps, or a hair. Tokens painted on countless vases that survive in museums where curators still struggle with how to label them for school groups. The pursuit was supposed to be restrained, dignified. The boy was never to appear too eager. That would mark him as wanting, shameful. Instead, he was to be courted like a fortress, being besieged slowly, methodically, until his surrender became a kind of honor. But here's where the story turns, where the carefully constructed philosophical veneer cracks to reveal something raw underneath. Because while Plato's Symposium elevated these relationships to transcendent spiritual unions, while poets sang of noble warriors whose love for their boy companions made them invincible in battle, the archaeological record whispers a different truth. The vases don't just show gift-giving and modest courtship. They show penetration. They show boys in positions of submission. They show a sexual reality that the philosophical texts danced around with elegant euphemisms about granting favors and bestowing grace. The boy at the symposium knew what was expected. His own father likely arranged his attendance, selecting his son's arrests with the same care he'd used choosing a teacher of rhetoric or military tactics. Because this was education, the older man would introduce the youth to the city's elite, would teach him to navigate the treacherous waters of Athenian politics, would model the virtues of courage, moderation, and wisdom that defined the ideal citizen. And in exchange, the boy's body became, in their framework, a kind of gift, a tangible expression of gratitude and submission that was simultaneously sexual. Yule and Pedic. The wine flowed freely at these gatherings, mixed with water and ratios debated with surprising seriousness. Too much water and you were a bore. Too little and you'd lost control, that most Greek of terrors. Conversation drifted from philosophy to politics to the relative beauty of various youths. Discussed with the same analytical rigor they'd apply to a mathematical proof. Someone would recite poetry, perhaps the Who's verses explicitly advised men on the proper conduct toward their boy lovers, warning them against the fickleness of youth who once past their prime would abandon their older partners without gratitude. But we need to pause here to resist the temptation toward either uncritical celebration or simplistic condemnation, because the truth is more unsettling than either extreme. These weren't monsters by their own cultural logic. They were Pericles and Sophocles, Socrates and Alcibiades men, we still quote, whose ideas about democracy and justice and the examined life form the bedrock of Western thought. How do we hold both truths simultaneously? That they could reason with breathtaking clarity about the nature of virtue while systematically sexualizing adolescent boys. That the same culture that gave us the Parthenon and tragic drama also normalized what we now unambiguously recognize as child abuse. The answer lies partly in understanding how radically different their conception of sexuality was from ours. The Greeks didn't divide the world into heterosexual and homosexual. Those categories didn't exist. Instead, they divided it into active and passive penetrator, and penetrated an adult male citizen could penetrate anyone of lower status women, slaves, foreigners, boys, without any stigma whatsoever. The shame attached entirely to being penetrated to assuming the passive role that was considered inherently feminine and therefore degrading for an adult male citizen. This is why the boy was supposed to show reluctance, why he was never to appear to enjoy the sexual act too much. His role was to endure it as a form of character building, to emerge from the experience toughened, educated, transformed. The night deepened. Someone called for entertainment, flute girls perhaps, or acrobats, the kind of professional performers who existed in a liminal social space, neither respectable nor entirely outcast. The boy watched, aware of eyes upon him, aware that his every gesture was being evaluated, catalogued, judged. Would he drink too much? Would he speak too boldly or not boldly enough? Would he successfully navigate the impossible balance between appearing available but not eager, honored but not humiliated? In Sparta, the system was even more formalized. Every boy, upon turning 12, was assigned an older male mentor, not chosen, but assigned like homework. These relationships were mandatory components of the AOGE, the brutal military education that transformed Spartan boys into warriors. The Spartans characteristically stripped away all of Athens' philosophical pretensions and reduced it to its functional core. Older warriors sexually dominating younger trainees to instill discipline and military prowess. They didn't write dialogues about the transcendent nature of love. They just did it systematically as part of statecraft. Archaeological discoveries continue to complicate our understanding. In 1997, researchers analyzing drinking cups from aristocratic homes found scenes that previous generations of scholars had dismissed as gymnasium scenes or mentorship depictions. Modern analysis, freed from Victorian sensibilities, recognized them for what they were: explicit documentation of sexual acts between men and boys, painted not as secret shame but as public celebration. These weren't hidden away. They drank from these cups at parties. They gave them as gifts. The sexuality was the point, not something to be hidden, but something to be aestheticized, integrated into the visual culture of elite male socialization. But there were limits, boundaries that revealed the system's internal contradictions. A boy was supposed to graduate from the Araminos role by his late teens, when his beard began to grow, when his body took on the musculature of manhood. To continue in the passive role beyond that point was deeply shameful. Those men existed called Canidos, and they were objects of mockery and contempt, their continued receptivity to penetration, marking them as fundamentally broken, unable to claim their rightful place in the hierarchy of male citizenship. The system was designed to be temporary, a phase. Though one wonders about the psychological impact on boys who were told that their sexual use by older men was simultaneously educational, honorable, and something they should be eager to escape. The women, meanwhile, lived in a separate world, almost entirely. Respectable wives remained in the Guinea, the women's quarters, emerging only for religious festivals. They bore legitimate children in managed households, but weren't considered fit companions for intellectual discourse or emotional intimacy. This sexual segregation meant that the deepest emotional bonds in a man's life were often with other males: his boy, lover, and youth, his mentor and adolescence, his comrades in arms as an adult. Marriage was a civic duty, a mechanism for producing the next generation of citizens. Love, in the sense of passionate attachment and intellectual companionship, happened elsewhere. The night wore on. Someone began singing a Skolian, one of those drinking songs that ranged from the political to the obscene, often both simultaneously. The melody was ancient even then, passed down through generations, the words evolving with each retelling, but the core remaining constant: celebrate youth. Beauty fades, death comes for everyone, so drink and love while you can. The boy felt the wine warming his blood, felt the boundaries of his body becoming less distinct. This was also part of the education, learning to maintain dignity while intoxicated, to speak well even as the room tilted, to make connections and alliances in these intimate spaces where the city's real business happened. Far from the formal debates of the assembly, temple records from Delhi and Olympia reveal another layer: sacred prostitution involving young males at certain festivals, boys dedicated to Apollo or Zeus, their bodies offered to worshippers as a form of religious devotion, the proceeds supporting the sanctuary. The sacred and sexual weren't opposed categories, but deeply intertwined. The gods themselves, models of sexual fluidity. Zeus pursuing Ganymede, Apollo and Hyacinthus. The myths encoding and legitimizing the practices. When priests at Olympia recorded donations from wealthy patrons who'd spent time with the temple boys, they did so in the same matter-of-fact language they'd use for any other transaction. Theology and economy and sexuality merged into a single system, each supporting the others. But we have to ask, what did the boys themselves think? Here the sources frustrate us because they almost never speak. We have the older men's perspectives preserved in philosophy and poetry, their idealized visions of noble love and educational benefit. We have vase paintings created for adult male consumption. What we almost never have are the voices of the boys themselves, their own accounts of these experiences. Did they feel honored or violated, educated or exploited? The silence is itself revealing in a culture that valued male speech, that trained boys in rhetoric and oratory. Their silence on this topic suggests boundaries on what could be said. Experiences that couldn't be named even in a society famous for its openness about sexuality. A few fragments survive, hints of resistance and trauma. Esgon, in a legal speech, mentions boys who killed themselves after being shamed by persistent older pursuers. Aristophanes, in his comedies, includes jokes about boys who've been ruined by too enthusiastic participation in these relationships. Their reputations permanently damaged. These glimpses suggest that beneath the philosophical idealization, there was suffering. Boys who didn't experience their sexual use as ennobling, but as degrading, who carried scars that their culture had no language to acknowledge. The boy at the symposium stood to leave as dawn approached, moving slightly, unsteadily, toward the door. His arrests walked with him, proper form, dictated accompanying the youth home, protecting him through the dangerous streets. What happened in that walk home, in the privacy of darkened doorways? We can only imagine from the euphemisms in literature and the more explicit depictions on pottery. The boy would wake the next day and return to the gymnasium to his studies, carrying the experience in his body and mind, marked by it in ways both visible and invisible. As the practice aged with the civilization itself, as Athens declined and Rome rose, as Christianity spread through the Mediterranean with its radically different sexual ethics, pederastia became one of the main targets of reformers. Early Christian writers pointed to it as evidence of paganism's moral bankruptcy, proof that the classical world needed salvation. The Emperor Justinian, in the 6th century CE, explicitly criminalized same-sex relations, citing divine wrath as justification. The symposiums ended. The philosophical justifications were buried or burned. The vases were broken or hidden away, not to be systematically excavated until archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries began unearthing them, initially unable to quite believe what they were seeing. Museums today face an ongoing challenge: how to display this material. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, the British Museum, the Louvre, they all hold collections of these vases. These explicit documentations of a practice that was simultaneously celebrated art and what we now recognize as systematic child sexual abuse. The labels try to provide context to explain cultural difference without excusing it. School groups are rooted around certain rooms. Digital collections blur certain images. The past refuses to be safely contained in the present. What are we to make of this? How do we reconcile our admiration for Greek achievement in art, philosophy, drama, and politics with this dark undercurrent running through it all? Perhaps the lesson is precisely in the discomfort in resisting the temptation to either whitewash the past into something we can easily celebrate or reduce it to simple barbarism we can easily condemn. The Greeks were neither heroes nor monsters, but human beings working within a moral framework radically different from ours, capable of both brilliance and blindness, of creating democracy while denying women the vote, of reasoning about justice while sexually exploiting children. The boy from that symposium, did he grow to become a prominent citizen, a general perhaps, or a philosopher? Did he internalize the experience as education or carry it as trauma? Did he, when his turn came, seek out younger boys himself, perpetuating the cycle? Or did he resist, finding the practice distasteful despite its social sanction? We'll never know his name or his fate. He exists for us only as a shadow on a vase, a figure in a philosophical dialogue, a silence in the archive. But his shadow is long. It reaches across 25 centuries to challenge our easy assumptions about progress, about the linear march from barbarism to civilization. Because they thought they were civilized, these Greeks, they thought they were the pinnacle of human achievement. And in many ways they were. And yet, the same hands that carved the Elgin marbles, that wrote the Orestia that proved the Pythagorean theorem, also normalized and ritualized the sexual exploitation of children in ways both casual and systematic. The marble floor where we began, cold beneath invisible feet, belongs to a temple somewhere in Athens, perhaps the Parthenon itself, that monument to reason and democracy and aesthetic perfection. Inside, in rooms tourists never see, there were once votive offerings, small bronze figurines of boys left by grateful Arisi, thanking the gods for successful relationships. Some of these survive in museum storage, rarely displayed, rarely discussed. Tangible proof that what we might wish were myth or exaggeration was documented reality, woven into the civilization's religious life. The chanting we heard was hymn singing at dawn, one of countless religious ceremonies that structured Greek life, that connected the physical and spiritual, the human and divine. Those same ceremonies blessed the relationships between men and boys, sanctified them, made them holy. When we visit ruins today, when we admire the proportions of a temple or the precision of a frieze, we're walking through spaces where these practices happened, were celebrated, were considered essential to maintaining cosmic order. And so we're left with that cold marble floor with flickering torchlight, with the echo of ancient songs, whose melodies are lost, but whose purpose we now understand too well. The darkness isn't absolute anymore. We've brought our own light, our own questions, our own horror and fascination. But some darkness remains, will always remain, because the past can never be fully illuminated. We can document and analyze and contextualize, but we cannot undo. We cannot save those boys. We cannot reach back through time and impose our ethics on a civilization that would have found them incomprehensible. What we can do is remember, not to celebrate or condemn, but to sit with the profound discomfort of historical truth, to recognize that the foundations of our civilization were built partly through the exploitation of children, that democracy and philosophy and art emerged from a culture that systematically sexualized adolescence. The temple still stands, beautiful in ruin. The vases still exist, exquisite in their craftsmanship. And the boys are still silent, their voices lost, present only as objects of desire and education in someone else's story. That's the darkness ancient Greece kept, not in shadow, but in plain sight, painted on cups and carved in marble, written in dialogues and sung in poems, a darkness that thought itself. Even if the scrolls conceal these secrets, the stones of the Acropolis will carry these whispers forever, as we leave behind this historical reality where power and immorality intertwine. We understand how heavy the legacy of ancient Greece truly is. Amidst all this chaos, I need to gather energy for the next video. Perhaps we'll explore the dark sexuality of ancient Egypt. Take care of yourselves.